the climber, the guy who practically seemed to bend gravity to his will. I'm really fascinated to dig into his whole deal. The insane climbs, the rope jumps, the tragic ending, everything.
Yeah, it's a story that still has a real presence in the climbing world, even after all this time, you know?
For sure. And we've got some awesome stuff to work with for this deep dive. Picture this. Instead of like the challenge being to climb a mountain, right? You're all about that controlled fall back down. Hundreds of feet, thousands even, just trusting your life to this rope system you rigged yourself. That was Dan Osman's thing.
Yeah, he was a true original, no doubt.
Yep.
But, you know, his whole approach definitely ruffled some feathers in the climbing community. Some people were just blown away by his audacity,
Right.
you know. But others saw it as reckless, just plain reckless.
Yeah, I mean, even his early climbing career was pretty out there. He was known for these crazy solo ascents, no ropes, no partner, just him alone on the rock face. That's where he really cut his teeth on some seriously difficult climbs.
Which I think is an important point. It shows that this risk-taking, this pushing the limits, it was already ingrained in him long before he ever started rope jumping.
Oh, absolutely. And it wasn't just any climbs either. Like the article, it specifically mentions Atlantis, this 500-foot climb that even today is considered extremely challenging. And get this, there's this photo of him on Atlantis doing a human flag, like just sticking straight out from the rock face, hundreds of feet up. And the article, it even mentions that he had broken ribs earlier that same day from BMXing. The guy was unbelievable.
Yeah, he was constantly searching for that next level, you know,
yeah.
always pushing himself, pushing his own boundaries. And that drive, that's ultimately what led him to rope jumping, is a way to take his already incredible abilities and push them even further.
Right. I mean, who else would even think to do that, right? I'm already comfortable solo climbing hundreds of feet with broken ribs. What's next?
But back to the rope jumping for a sec. We're not talking about some amateur setup here. It really gets into the nitty-gritty of how complex his system was. Multiple climbing ropes, special pulleys, these anchors placed with like surgical precision, everything designed to handle these insane forces generated by these falls.
He wasn't just winging it. You know, he was meticulously planning and engineering these jumps. Osman, he understood the physics involved. He carefully calculated the rope length. He utilized those pulleys, and by doing that, he could actually change how the force was distributed on his body during the fall, making those incredibly long drops survivable. So it's almost like controlled demolition they do with buildings, but instead of a building, it's his own body he's protecting from those forces. Okay, so we're talking about a guy who's already totally fine with the level of risk most people can't even fathom, and then he adds this whole other layer of complexity, this rope jumping on top of it. It makes you wonder what was it that made him want to take those risks?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it's something we're going to keep digging into as we go further into his story. But one thing's for sure, the danger, it was very, very real.
And it wasn't just theoretical either, you know, like there were real consequences. Bobby Tarver, he was a young climber, friends with Osman, and he tried one of these rope jumps back in '94.
Right. And tragically, yeah, Tarver, he was following Osman's guidance, using a similar setup for the jump, but something went wrong. There was a miscalculation, and he didn't survive the fall.
God, that's awful. It must have been just devastating for Tarver's family and friends, of course, but for Osman too. I mean, to have your friend die while trying something so inherently risky, something that you're known for, that's heavy stuff.
Yeah, it sent shockwaves through the whole climbing community for sure. A lot of people were questioning whether Osman's jumps were just going too far. Like, was he encouraging others to take on these crazy risks that they weren't ready for?
Totally. It makes you think something like that, how would it affect someone in Osman's position? You know, did he ever question what he was doing? Did it make him more cautious at all, or did it just push him even further?
It's hard to say.
Yeah.
Hard to say for sure. But we do know that Osman, he continued rope jumping.
Yeah.
And his jumps, they only got more daring, you know, more audacious.
Which leads us to what a lot of people consider his most ambitious jump and maybe his most controversial one, the Leaning Tower in Yosemite. Now, this wasn't just some random cliff, you know, this is like a sheer rock face over 1,000 feet high.
Yeah, just let that sink in for a second. Just picture it. The Eiffel Tower is only about 1,050 feet tall, and Osman is out here jumping from a height that's even greater than that, trusting his life to these ropes and pulleys.
It's It's mind-blowing, honestly. Point out that this leaning tower jump, it was riskier than anything he tried before, and for a lot of reasons.
Yeah, definitely. There were a lot of factors that made it particularly dangerous. For one, the article mentions that on the day of the jump, the conditions were wet. And anyone who climbs knows, wet conditions, they can weaken climbing ropes.
Oh, wow. So like a critical element of his whole setup might have been compromised from the start. That's a huge red flag.
Exactly. And on top of that, the angle of the leaning tower jump, it was different from what Osman was used to. It meant he had to use even more rope than usual, which changes everything about how the fall works, how the force is distributed, and it puts even more stress on the whole system.
So it's like everything about this particular jump was pushing the limits of what was considered safe, even for Osman.
Absolutely.
Miles Daisher, Osman's close friend and his frequent jumping partner, Daisher had a really bad feeling about this one.
Yeah, Daisher was actually there that day. And he even told Osman about his concerns. He voiced them. But it seems like Osman, he was set on doing it. He was determined.
It's like he was in a rush almost, like he felt this need to prove something, to push himself further than he ever did before.
That's a really interesting point. Right before the jump, Osman, he made a phone call to some friends, and he told them, "This is it. I'm going big." Which, knowing what we know now, it's kind of chilling, kind of heartbreaking.
Yeah, it's like maybe he had a premonition or something, or at least a sense that this jump, it was different.
It's impossible to say for sure, but it does add another layer to the whole tragedy, doesn't it? Mm-hmm. And as the sun began to set that day, casting these long shadows across Yosemite Valley, Dan Osman, he stepped off the edge of the leaning tower and into the void.
And Daisher, just watching it all unfold, waiting down below, 1,000 feet of empty air between Osman and the ground. God, it's hard to even imagine what must have been going through his mind.
Yeah, the article describes how Daisher, he heard the rope snap taut. That sound that Osman used to call, was it flossing the sky, I think? But it wasn't the right sound, it wasn't that clean, sharp snap it was supposed to be. There was this weird, like, twang to it, and then this awful yell, mm-hmm. and then just a crash. Man, knowing what we know now, it's just brutal thinking about what Daisher must have felt right then. It's tough to even imagine. He immediately took off running, trying to find his friend, just scrambling down to the base of the leaning tower, fearing the worst, of course. And that's where he found it, in the fading light, the broken rope, and Osman. Man,
what a terrible end to a story that already had so much risk, so much daring baked into it. So what happened then? What came next? Was it just like an open and shut case, tragic accident, end of story, or was there more to it?
Well, that's where things get kind of interesting. It kind of hints at this whole controversy that surrounded the investigation into Osman's death.
Oh, really? What kind of controversy are we talking about?
So it seems like some of Osman's friends, they weren't satisfied with the official explanation. They thought that there might have been something else going on, maybe even foul play. Or at the very least, they wanted to be absolutely sure about what caused the rope to fail.
So what did they do?
They basically took things into their own hands. They got a hold of a piece of the broken rope, and they sent it to Black Diamond, the company that made it. They wanted an independent analysis. Yeah. They wanted to know what really happened.
Wow, that's kind of ballsy, isn't it? Going behind the authorities' backs like that?
Yeah, for sure. And there were like threats from the FBI. Seems like they were not happy about this whole independent investigation thing.
Wow. Okay, this just took a turn. So what Black Diamond find? Was there something wrong with the rope? Was there any evidence of, I don't know, sabotage or something?
Nope, not really. No. Their analysis, it basically concluded that the rope itself was fine. It was human error, a miscalculation, and it had these just totally devastating consequences.
Yeah. So even with all of Osman's experience, all the planning he was famous for, a simple mistake, that's all it took.
That's right. It seems like the wet conditions, the weird angle of the jump, that extra rope he had to use, mm-hmm. it all came together in a way that he didn't anticipate, and
it cost him his life.
Yeah.
It's a pretty stark reminder, isn't it, that even the best, even the most skilled, the most daring people out there, they're still human.
For sure.
They make mistakes, and sometimes those mistakes, well, there's no coming back from them.
Yeah, Osman's story, it's inspiring and heartbreaking all at the same time. He lived his life exactly how he wanted to, always testing those limits, always pushing further than anyone thought possible. But his death, it's a reminder for all of us, I think, that even when we think we've got everything calculated, even the most calculated risks, they can still have consequences we never could have imagined.
Absolutely. It really makes you think about that line between pushing your limits and just going too far, doesn't it? Like,
Yeah.
where do we even draw that line? Is there even such a thing as too far when it comes to risk, to adventure?
Yeah, those are questions we all have to wrestle with,
Yeah.
in our own lives. There's no easy answers. But as we've seen with Dan Osman's story, the choices we make, they can have some really profound consequences.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, it's a lot to think about, that's for sure. A story that really sticks with you. Thanks for taking this deep dive with me. It's been eye-opening, to say the least.
The pleasure was mine, really. Until next time.